Right now, all this stuff is kind of global. We're just making a bunch of global variables, global functions, all that stuff. That's not ideal. Let's organize our code a little differently. How about, now that we know about methods, we know you can actually make functions a property of an object. What if we made our app one big object and all of our functions were just properties of that object? How about that? How's that sound? That sounds terrific, David. Let's do it. Yes, let's. Okay. Const app. Why not? Let's call it app. Okay, we know we need the form. What's actually happening? What's actually happening here? So first we grab a form from the page. Then we define 3 functions. Then we add an event listener to that form. So we declare the form, and then we don't do anything with the form until way, way later. That's kind of silly. So what actually happens when the page loads is it grabs the form and it adds the event listener. And that's all that really happens, right? The rest is just defining a bunch of functions that get run later. So I'm going to make a function that runs first thing. I'm going to call it init. So init is just a property of app. That happens to be a function. And what's it going to do? It's going to grab the form off the page. And it's going to add the event listener to the form. It's not going to work yet, but bear with me. So that should happen. We need another function for render property. So let's make another, again, property of our app object called render property. Colon. It's a function. It's this function right here. Notice my little squigglies here. Comma expected, right? So init is just a property of app inside a literal, so I need a comma after it. So I'm going to need a comma after render property too. Okay, great. Render item, let's make that. That's quite the thing. That's kind of a long one. Render item is another property. It's a function. Don't forget your comma at the end. Got another function called handle submit equals, oops, colon, right? This is just an object. This function right here. I'm going to leave my trailing comma there just because otherwise I know I forget. What happens now when I load the page? Nothing. I just declare a variable. None of this ever runs, right? So I should probably actually call init. So at the bottom, I'll just say app.init. Wonderful. Now everything's going to work just the same. No? Nope. Immediately explodes. That's all right. One error at a time. Let's see what it's complaining about. Handle submit is not defined at object.init, line 4. Okay. Line 4. That's where I call handle submit. It says handle submit is not defined. What? Why not? Say again? It's not a property. So where's handle submit? It's app.handleSubmit now, isn't it? I'll tell you, I feel a little funny calling app from inside app. App is the variable name that we assign to this object, but it seems like an object ought to be able to refer to itself some other way internally, right? I mean, it's just it happens to be a variable called app, but what if I name the variable something else? The internals of that very object shouldn't care. You need to be able to refer to yourself from the inside. Anybody know how to do that? This. So from inside app, I want to call it this dot handle submit. Because handle submit's a method now, right? Cool. This dot handle submit. That should take care of everything. Sweet. No errors. It's all going to work. Explode! We need more of thises, don't we? So the next one, we'll just handle them one at a time. That's okay. Render item is not defined inside handle submit on line 45. It tells us what line. It tells us what's not defined. So render item, line 45. Here we are, 45. Render item. That should be this dot render item. Piece of cake. This is easy. Refresh. Render item is not a function. This dot render item is not a function. What? This dot, what? Do you already know the answers? That way you're starting to raise your hand?
I was going to ask a question.
What's your question?
So is this never implicit in JavaScript?
Is it never implicit? You can't ever leave it out if you mean it. No, right. So if it were, what you could do is like declare a function inside another function as a local variable, and then, it'll just be in the local scope. Yeah. But no, it's not. No, it's not. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere where it is. No, it's really not. So it says this dot render item is not a function. Well, what the crap's up with that? You guys are going to love this. This is the best feature of JavaScript. It makes perfect sense all the time. So that makes me think maybe this isn't what we think it is. Inside an object, it sure seems like, inside a method of an object, it sure seems like this should be the object. Most of the time it is. But it turns out it doesn't matter how you defined that function. What matters is how you call the function. It's the function invocation, the way that it's run, that actually determines how this is set, how this is bound. If you call a function by just like name of function parentheses, this is actually always going to be the global object window, which is completely useless. If you call it as a method by saying name of object dot name of function parentheses, this is going to be bound to whatever was before the dot, the object. How was handle submit invoked? I said right there, this dot. See? I called it as a method. Oh, wait, I didn't call it at all, did I? There I called it. Here, I didn't call it. JavaScript called it for me, right? JavaScript called it for me when an event fired. So the way handle submit was actually invoked was as an event handler. And when a function is invoked as an event handler, this is bound to the event target, even if it's a method. Doesn't matter if it's acting as an event handler. This is going to get bound to the target of the event. So it's going to be the form. So how do we overcome this? I'll give you just a minute to think about this. Reflect, meditate. Go to your happy place. How can we fix this? Turns out, just a moment. So the issue here is when you call a function like this by saying object.init open close parens, this is bound to whatever was before the dot. When JavaScript automatically invokes the thing as an event handler, this is always bound to the target of the event. Yeah, Aaron?
I was going to say you could use bind.
You could use bind. So there's a few ways to do this. Anybody got another idea? Yeah.
You can like declare a function but not like attach it to a property. So you can just have a function in it.
Like an anonymous function?
No, just like function and then name and then
Okay, yeah, assuming I don't want to do that. Assuming I want to leave it as a method. I want to make it so that inside...
I mean,
And so the inside handle submit, this is what I want it to be.
Oh, okay.
I want to leave the code for handle submit as close to the same as I can, but have this be bound to the right thing. Anybody have any ideas besides that? So what he's referring to is the fact that there is actually a way to just plain choose what you want this to be. So I could say this dot handle submit dot bind and tell it what I want it to be. What I want it to be? Well, I want it to be the same thing that this is on line 4 here. So I could just say bind this. Totally works. Refresh. Rackety smackety. Now render properties not defined. Good. Different error. We've made progress. Line 21. Render property should be this dot render property. Refresh. Try again. This dot render property is not a function on line 21. What? Where's render property? Wait, where are we? What function are we in right now? Are we? We're inside this anonymous function right here, right? Gosh dang it. Yep, we're inside a different function. So we could, following Aaron's advice, when we declare this function here, we could say dot bind this. That works. Totally works. I hope. Rackety smackety. Okay, now I'm getting somewhere. Okay, everything seems to work. So there is dot bind. If you ever have a function where this is not what you want it to be, because again, this is a function that we didn't call ourselves, right? Map called it for us. You can always use dot bind to force this to be something else, but there's another trick. Another really good trick that ES6 gives us. In ES6, there's a new syntax for making functions. Anybody know what I'm referring to? Arrow functions. So instead of saying const do it equals function whatever, there's a new syntax in ES6. Where instead of saying function parentheses, you say parentheses arrow equal greater than sign. It's shorter, which just kind of makes it nicer once you get used to the fact that that's what it is. But it has another nifty effect, which is that it's basically automatically doing bind this at the end every time. So when you have an arrow function, inside that arrow function, this will always be bound to whatever it was in its surrounding context. So basically, it'll always be what you expect it to be. So we could just use arrow functions everywhere. We'll talk more about how to use them, but so for this thing that I passed into map, instead of saying function property, I could say property arrow. Then I don't have to bind this. Another little bit of syntax. If there's only one argument to the function, you can actually leave the parentheses off. You can just say argument, arrow, and the body of the arrow. The body of the function. There's some other syntax shortcuts. I won't lay it all on you at once. But there's another shortcut we could use here. So here we're doing this again for each. Instead of saying function EL, I could tell EL arrow. Makes anonymous functions not take up quite so much space. And it just binds this the way that we expect every time. So for all these object properties, we could do that too. So if this dot handle submit, instead of binding this, I could write handle submit as an arrow function in the first place. Then it doesn't matter that it's an event handler. So I can just do that to all of these. This time I can't get rid of the parentheses because there's more than one argument, right? Do I see the word function in here anywhere? No, it's not in there at all anymore. They're all arrow functions. Let's see what happens. Shoot, I broke it. Didn't get any errors either. I braked it. What'd you do, dummy? What did I do? Yeah.
So the URL changed when you submitted the form, so I think that
Prevent default didn't happen. Yeah. Why not? Why didn't handle submit happen? Why didn't prevent default happen? If I throw debugger in here, is this even running? I don't think I'm even hitting that. I'm still running in it at the end there, right? Yeah. What'd I do? Isn't it running? That's what happens when I improvise. Okay, so that's running. But my event listener is not doing what I want it to do. Let's throw debugger in here. Okay. So now I'm inside init. This dot handle submit. Is that a thing? It's not. What is this? This is window. It's suddenly the global thing. Yeah, maybe I don't want arrow functions for all those inside an object. Yeah, this is an object, not a class. Yeah.
Would it work if you made init with the old function syntax, but then
And did all the others that way? I'm afraid all the others would break. I have to admit, I've never actually done it quite this way. So I think if I'm using arrow functions inside the properties, yeah, this isn't going to do what I want it to do. Yes, so we're going to go back and we're going to do that instead of doing all this. So tried to take a shortcut that I can't take quite yet. In case you can't tell, this isn't quite how I do things for real. But I will leave arrow functions for these callbacks. Let's make sure we're back to a working state. Oops. Okay, we're back to this dot render item is not a function. Okay, good. So what about this? What if handle submit were not actually the event handler? What if the event handler were an anonymous function that calls handle submit? In other words, what if I do something like this? So now handle submit is being called like a method, right? So it's actually being called with this dot handle submit open close parens. So now it is a method. So now this should be the right thing, as long as I use an arrow function for this callback. Because if I didn't, then this would already be bound to something else. I just need to make sure I pass in the event still, because I use prevent default. Or instead, I could just do prevent default right here. Call handle submit, and then handle submit doesn't need to worry about it anymore. I could do that. Take EV out of here, get rid of, but then I need the target, right? So yeah, let's just do it the way we were doing it. So that's a lot for the very, very end of class. We're back to working. So use an anonymous function as the callback to add event listener. If I use an arrow function for that, then I know that inside this function, this will be the right thing. And then I can invoke handle submit as a regular old method with the dot syntax, which means this will be bound to what I think it is. and everything's back to working. So use an object with methods is ultimately what we did here.